Tihei Wananga, kia ora and welcome to this series of Vision Wananga, an insight into the past of one of New Zealand's largest tertiary institutions. Here we will explore and discover the history of the Wananga Aotearoa and delve into the minds of great pioneers and explorers whom transformed and shaped the educational landscape. Nō reira, whakapiripiri mai, whakatata mai, kia oro atu ki te hā o Tihei Wananga.
Aotearoa no he wai, he pupua ke ana, e awa e mapuna mai ana i roto i te whatu manawa. Ko te aroha no
Well, like most schools, we had Maori delinquency, and there were a lot of expulsions and suspensions, and although I have to say that when I first went there, Boy Mungu was the teacher in charge of Maori studies, and Boy was very good at working in with families and trying to get the students back on the rails. But I guess we didn't have good structures in place for dealing with Maori delinquents. No.
Nā ko mōhia kia rongo. I tērā koetanga. Te makeretanga mai o ngā tamariki tāne, tamariki wāhina, Maori Pākehā, I taua kura. Kāre te tōtika te mahi a ngā kura nei, kia tātou.
The education system focuses on the European model, the European culture, the European language, so everything was built around that. And until that situation changed, there wouldn't be any great improvement for Māori.
A tā mai te tangi mai te wai aro. Nā haui I a whao, te poho o tīpanga me tau ahe. Me mai rau ahe take tāku. Me hara mai koe ki konei I te whakahiro I tēnei whare. Whare tāku kei te whakatūria ki wānganui o Te Aomuti.
We wanted to put it in Kihiki, and we were just about thrown out of the hall. By this time, Rongo had already got Paki Harrison in, he's the Pauwhenua, he's the man as far as carving was concerned, and we'd been on fact-finding tours to show the people that we weren't going to build something second-rate.
When we built the wharenui at college, we had Patrick he had taken people off the street basically and put them through a carving test of his own. And he said he would know within a few days whether a person had the skills to carve or not. Rongo got it pushed through. Somehow, I don't know how he did it, but he talked these people into, the Board of Governors into allowing him to build this marae.
It was very challenging at the time because even banks were not supportive. At the time, there were quite a lot of negative write-ups about the project. I know that Rongo was struggling. He was struggling for funds, he was struggling for support, he was struggling for acceptance.
There was definitely racism. There is today. We shouldn't muck around with it. There is racism, but mostly it was ignorance. Ignorance, you know, lack of understanding.
There was a businessman in town who was very anti the whole marae concept and was very vocal about the whole marae concept. And he came down when it was getting towards the end and the carvings were in place and the whole thing, and he spent a lot of time going through the thing, talking to people who were working there and so on. He said, I think this is a brilliant idea, and he wrote out a cheque for $1,000 and handed it over on the spot. So that was an example of how people's attitudes did change.
I mean, down here, the Charlestons, just down the bottom of the road here, I mean, the Charlestons, they gave the trees, they gave all the wood, all the totara for Tawhao, or most of it.
He tapped us all on the shoulder and said, no, if you give me $1,000, I'll put a plaque up with your name on it, on one of the carvings, or one of the tukituku panels. And that was how he raised a lot of the money. It was very effective.
It was more magnificent than I ever thought it would be, and it was more magnificent than even anyone in the town. Then the town started to change. You see, you get some of the town fathers coming over, saying, "Oh, this is not too bad. Perhaps we've been a bit hasty." And at the same time, our own people coming over, "Oh, your fella's not so koretake after all. Oh, it's not bad." Oh. And then we got the whole thing behind us, you see, but we had everybody going with us then.
The first experience I had really of knowing the enormity of his plans was the opening of the Aotearoa marae, because there were huge people. I think it was a 2-day event, and the whole community was involved.
It was a terrific day because, you know, we had fellas like Peter Tapsell, who was the Minister of something, Maori Affairs or something. We had all who had just wiped us, you know, and they were all on board. And no, it was great.
Rongo had a wager with one of his neighbours, and his neighbour said to him, "Rongo, if you can get those people in Te Wananga to support you in what you're trying to do, like trying to build a meeting house there right in the middle of the town," he says, "I'll supply the pork for your hangi." So all of a sudden, you see, all Tawhao was up, and Rongo had won this bet, and this farmer next door provided all of the pigs, and I don't know, there was numerous.
I know we had 2,800 hangis. It was quite unusual to, way back in the 80s, to have a carved marae anywhere, and particularly one like Tawhao, which was beautifully carved by Hinemoa's family and Paki. The weaving was tremendous and still is. But it's really an example of what quality Maori arts and crafts is all about.
And then he said he wants to set up this training centre. He talked about there's going to be a lot more kids who will be expelled from the college.
And Rongo had installed us in the old dairy factory, Taumata Dairy Factory, huge place. God, it was 70 feet high and lonely, cold, 1 bar heater there each.
So they created the arts and crafts place. They called it the Waipa Kokiri Centre, where our young people were able to go along there and learn skills and new skills, and create some of this beautiful artwork that we see today, and also market that artwork.
We were in the dairy factory. We were carving away there, and we had almost all of Tawhao done, and There was one or two other meeting houses too that we had on the go at the same time, for funding. We didn't do it because we liked doing 3 or 4 jobs at once. We did it because we damn well had to pay the bills.
The Waipa Kōkiri Centre offered things like plumbing, drain laying, carpentry, all of those kinds of programs.
The workmen's shed, when we had our first trust meeting for Wananga, or for Kōkiri Centre, we had it in the shed, and you couldn't get it from the main road unless you had a come with song.
It was like a pie cart and a wooden bench in it and a couple of forms, and I can tell you it was as wet and muddy all round it, and it was as cold as hell inside, so a meeting wouldn't go any more than about an hour and a half because we were all very pleased to get out of it.
And then the dairy factory said to us, well, you're going to have to get out of here. We're going to wreck it. And that put a cat amongst the pigeons. Here we are with all these, we had a setup there that was, we had office girls, we'd sort of started to get a little bit organised, and then we had to shift. But they said, you can take anything you want. And that was from the girders to the windows, taps, plumbing, sinks, anything that was there we could have.
We then looked at an area of land down behind the college where we are now in Factory Road, which was then a rubbish dump.
I thought it was the end. I thought, well, we're never going to get through this one wrong. It just seemed to, no, we'll be right. And he knew a guy called Dan Harris, who was an ex-army man. I think his name was ex-AMP man. And he said, we'll go and get the wrong. I said, we'll go and get the army, and we'll get them to wreck this factory for us. And I didn't know how the hell we're going to get the army. So away we go in the old blue Mitsubishi again, another trip to Auckland. And it must have been up 300,000 miles by now. And away we go in this thing with Dan Harris.
And I had said to him, if you're going to build a school on these, you better put a life jacket on it, because I can always remember those paddocks there when the cattle used to be running around to be standing up to their knees in mud and water, and it was a shocking place. I didn't ever think it was going to be suitable for what it is today.
And finally, at the end of the day, when we're just about given hope, we're ushered into this office, Rongo, me and Dan Harris. And Dan does the thing because he's an ex-army man. And he was a Maori, luckily enough. It was, I remember I don't know whether he was a colonel, lieutenant colonel, but he was some Colonel McGregor. I saw Henry Bennett and asked him if we could put the army up at Nurse's home at Tokanui. And that was okay, and we did that for free. That was Tokanui Hospital and probably Henry Bennett's contribution towards at Wharenui. And we put them up there for about 3 weeks, I think.
And these guys were enjoying that work, so we were very lucky, and we had the use and the help of various people around about with trucks and things to cart a lot of the smashed up concrete over and put in a good foundation for the building areas that we were going to be on.
Challenges were enormous. The tauira at the time were undergoing social, financial, psychological disadvantages, including academic disadvantages. Many of them were leaving school somewhere along the 4th form.
And I would say within 6 or 8 months of it commencing, we started to see a tremendous difference in the discipline that they were bringing in themselves. They were starting to feel as though they belonged to something.
Then I rang Rongo up and I said, well, look, I've got some computers over here, you can have 2 or 3 if you like. How quickly can you be over here? And he said, 15 minutes. And he was. It's not a 15-minute trip, but he was very quick.
So we put those computers into the Waipa Kōkiri Arts Centre to help develop the administration. And then we were able to put 10 into a room to be our first computer class.
All of the old traditional roadworks, freezing works, all those sorts of jobs had gone, and our people all over the nation were on the dole. And so it was the right time to move them into some form of training.
We hadn't seen any evidence of any great scheme or idea coming through the normal government channels to make a difference.
So when we changed our name from Waipa Kukuri Arts Centre to the Aotearoa Institute, we really started to create a lot of firsts for New Zealand. We were the first Māori private training establishment. We were the first to be accredited with New Zealand Qualifications Authority. We were the largest work-based training provider and probably served more Māori training positions in carving and weaving and other associated arts programs.
So the programs that we introduced and became involved in were really community orientated. Waka building, weaving and carving were all projects that urban Māori needed. And so the programs were very, very popular.
I think the challenges back in Aotearoa Institute days was to try and put into practice this word manaki, kiaki, aroha, rangi maria, mana, ihi, wei. And you had to demonstrate all that.
There was such a strong sense of whānau. That family was just so strong. Everybody knew everyone.
Things like money was really tight, and it was really tight. We went for years and, without drawing any pay, those sorts of things.
There we came home one afternoon and he said that, well, Mary, Rongo has spoken with me and the banks won't give us any money to get started, and the only way around that will be to put second mortgages on our home.
I think we both felt strongly enough about it to let it go ahead. And so did others.
So there were about 20 of us. And obviously he'd run, around various people to meet him at the bank.
I think it was important at that time to stand firmly, beside that request.
I think, if he'd asked us to jump off a cliff, we probably would have.
One of the things that really impressed me was the absolute commitment to meeting the needs of people where they are. And at that stage, people said, oh, Wanga, you should go into degrees and so forth. And he said, at that stage, what was needed was to pick up all those people for whom education had been a bad experience.
We wanted buildings. We had no money, and we used the Apakura campus down here to go to the bank and get some money. So the Apakura campus was valued at a figure which we thought was pretty good because it didn't cost us a hell of a lot of money.
We have to make education accessible. We figured that it's you need to go out into the rural communities, you need to take the message and the opportunity to where the people are.
At that time too, Rongo started to build new campuses. He began stretching out into Hamilton, into Manurewa, into Tikawiti, Rotorua and Tokoroa. And these campuses were a way that we could serve our local rural communities.
An inspiration that came a bit later with Buck Nun, who sort of gave me the view that we could actually go further than just an arts centre, that we could develop into a tertiary institution that could be funded by the Crown, that would give us a lot more punch and vigour and achieve a more wider impact in the nation and beyond the shores of New Zealand. He always talked about the Pan-Pacific.
He was always of the belief that education should be free, and and everybody should have access to it.
He was really disappointed at the lack of achievement of Māori in the Pākehā education system, and he knew that something had to be established to help with that.
It should not be funded privately or anything like that. It was the responsibility of the government to provide that.
He died in 1996, and I remember Rongo visited him on the Sunday night. He died about 2 days later, and I remember him saying, I remember very vividly him saying to Rongo, "Now, when I could be the most help to you, I'm going to be no help at all."
Many submissions were done by Buck, and that was that was free. He did it because he wanted to make it happen. We finally became a Wananga, and suddenly you could see the growth, but he was never there to partake in it, to benefit from, what we have now.
It's hard to express what he would say about the Wananga, but he would be so pleased with what had happened to it. I think it's gone perhaps even further than his visions had, although his visions probably would have continued evolving had he been here. And it's gone to the heights that he had hoped for it to have gone to.
We went to a poke in Waihi, Rongo and myself. We were sitting there outside, just before lunch it was, and the Minister of Education was there, Lockwood Smith.
Tainui were putting forward their claim through the Waitangi Tribunal. And I think that Dr. Lockwood Smith mistakenly thought that Te Wananga o Aotearoa was part of Tainui. But of course, that's not the case.
So after lunch, he gets up and straight away he talks about registering 2 Maori organisations as tertiary, full tertiary facilities. One was Te Wananga o Aotearoa and the other was Te Wananga o Raukawa.
Well, after 6 years of proposals after proposals after proposals to government, they finally conceded. And I thought that really all our problems would be over at that stage.
1994, when we were given the status of Wananga, I knew that at that particular stage, the Wananga had not got an establishment grant. Now, in 1986, I was appointed the chief executive of a polytech in Porirua, and I had the job of starting it up. Now, we got millions of dollars right from the start.
They gave us the status, but no funding. And I guess in retrospect, if you look at it in the cold light of day, we were meant to fail. Because how can you run an institution with no capital injection? Every other tertiary institution in the country has had substantial funding from the Crown, particularly the universities and the polytechnics. And Wananga was supposed to exist and make an impact with no funding.
I believe it was a reasonable compromise, although I recognise it meant there was then a further battle to achieve capital funding. But I don't feel bad about it, because given the fiscal crisis at the time, it was either a compromise or nothing.
Until finally, Rongo Wetere, in his anger, says, "Let's march on Parliament." And we did. And that started the ball rolling.
But But I do remember the biggest day for the Wananga was when we went to Parliament, and we went on a hikoi and asked the government to give us funding, and that was a great achievement.
We had prepared, in terms of our supporting waiata, our supporting haka, many items which would basically consolidate and support the kaupapa of our march.
The Wananga Aotearoa had 14 buses. I don't know who paid for it, but we had 14 buses. We went down on faith. Then we began to sing some songs. Remember, 800 odd Maori people standing from Parliament. Then we started to sing a song. E te hoko fitu atu and hoki mai e tamama. Next minute we looked to the left, and here were a group of people coming up. Horomia, they were all from Ngāti Pro, wondering who was singing their songs. But you see, Romo had a psychological ploy. He knew it's no good singing anybody else's song because they don't stay there. But there's a lot of Ngāti Pro people there. And by God, instead of 840 people, we had 2,000.
You know, and we know, that the single most important investment that we can make is in people, and the single most important way we can make that investment is through education. You have been sold down the river for the last 6 years because this system has not been invested in, and that's why you've had to come here today. Our promise to you is our proud record in this area will carry on. All power to you.
And then, standing in front, 100 odd policemen, we saw them lining up in front of the Parliament building because 250 young Maori men were told to take sticks, taiaha, koi, anything. And I noticed a few stolen broom handles. And they were going to do the peru. Woo-hee, make the wairo.
We were able to go to the Waitangi Tribunal and be heard, and they gave a judgment and recommendations.
We felt the case was strong. You can't deny people the right to equity and educational opportunity.
And at that hearing, we played the tape, the video recording of the protest to the judge. And he recognised it. And what impressed him most was the fact that it was a very, very cold winter's day in July.
To stand out in that rain, it was really cold and the wind was really, really harsh. And to have students pouring out their hearts for their institution, for Wananga, was a very powerful statement.
That had an effect on him and on his judgment. And he placed our case at the front of the pile. And the next step for us was to take that to the High Court. But the government, in their wisdom, sat down with us and negotiated a settlement.
Kia koutou, kia orara, te mihi ia koto kia orara atangi te manu ti ori ori atangi te ngako tangata no reira tene te mihi ia koto ia orara ia koto ia orara.
We've had a dedicated team in the establishment. We've had loyal students that wanted to succeed. And probably as an organisation, if you consider the whole, a whole lot of people did it together.
There's been people who have made contributions in terms of voluntary effort, voluntary time, development of course curriculum, just assistance to get development off the ground when there was no government funding, and to keep the vision in place to make a difference. And without that huge support, we certainly wouldn't be here today.
It is said that the bird that partakes in the food of the forest belongs to the forest. The bird that partakes in the food of education belongs to the world and its many opportunities. Nō reira, kāre arika ngā mihi kia kousa katoa Te Wananga o Aotearoa. I whakatakoto rea he whāriki mō tātai. Nō reira, e rauranga tira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, mauri ora kia tātou.